Is Oklahoma likely to get more pass run balanced this year, or be more like Baker Mayfield's last year, almost 2 to 3 times pass heavy?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, John, because they were even more pass heavy last year, specifically early on in the year, because Oklahoma was still, they were the running back depth wasn't where it typically is. They had a couple of guys out. Ramondre Stevenson was out for the first half of the year. T.J. Pledger missed that opening game because of the COVID protocol. So Oklahoma relied on the passing game a little bit more. It took a little bit longer for the offensive line to gel. So I think Oklahoma was a little bit more pass heavy. They averaged over 300 yards on the ground, and really wasn't up to what they prototypically are from a running game perspective. Now, that increased as the year went on. The offensive line gelled a little bit. Ramondre Stevenson was back in the fold, so they ran the ball really well, specifically to end the season against Iowa State and against Florida. So I do think that there'll be a little bit more balanced this year, John. So I think we'll see you'll see closer to what they were under, with not necessarily with Baker Mayfield, but with Kyler Murray, with Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, they were maybe even a little bit more run heavy. So I think they like their pieces on the offensive line. I think they feel like they got 7 or 8 guys that are ready, early on to play and to play really effectively at a high level. So I think the one concern that you have coming into the season is the depth at the running back position. So I think as long as Eric Gray, Kennedy Brooks, Trey Bradford, as long as those kids stay healthy, I think you will see a bigger dose of the running game this year. However, if they start seeing some injuries, they may have to rely on the passing game a little bit more.
The center position is pretty crucial.
Yeah, it is crucial. I think, for everything that Oklahoma asked, Bill Bedenbaugh asked his team to do offensively, from an offensive line perspective, I think the center is certainly the most important position on the offensive line. But I think as we've talked through the offseason here and in the fall camp, I think it's the biggest hole that Oklahoma had to fill, maybe in the entire team. So I think from everything that I've seen, everything that I've heard, I think Andrew Rame is really kind of taken that position and kind of ran with it. I think it didn't really take long. I think he kind of started to separate himself a little bit outside of at the later parts of the spring season, and then he's taken that over. He's done exactly what they would want him to do. He's gotten stronger, in terms of the off-season weight conditioning, the weight program, and I think he's shown a lot of leadership early on in some of the interviews that I've seen. So I think he's a guy that what Oklahoma would have liked is for him to kind of take that job early on in campus. So that's what exactly has happened. So yes, I think it's it's certainly an area of great importance for Oklahoma, but I think it's one that Oklahoma feels pretty comfortable with having him there.
Cheryl chiming in concerning a former Buckeye, and we know what the deal is with Alex Grinch. He did a remarkable job with the Washington State defense. It's just amazing to see the metrics and what they were with, not exaggerating, 2-star and 3-star defenders playing on that side of the ball for Washington State. He goes to Ohio State, had to kind of share duties. I think that they had maybe too much talent on the coaching staff, and they should have just cut it loose with either he or Greg Schiano. Goes to Oklahoma. And I got to tell you, Jason, because Oklahoma is obviously on everybody's minds from a national perspective, is that regardless of the show, if we're talking National College Football or even another team, Oklahoma will slide into the conversation at times. Of course, if I'm talking Clemson or Ohio State, those big teams in particular, and the media seems to be a bit split on whether this Oklahoma defensive upgrade is legit or not. Cheryl asking about the upgrades to the defense.
It is, Mark, I think that's the biggest question, in the offseason, certainly, and then coming into this season. Now look, the improvements are paramount that we've seen so far from Oklahoma. They were, when Grinch took over, unfortunately, it's hard to imagine at a school like Oklahoma, but they were one of the worst defenses in the country 3 years ago. 2 years ago, they made some improvements, not anywhere near where they wanted to be, but certainly made some improvements. And then last year, they ended up 29th overall defensive in the country. And then when you look at the last 6 games, they gave up 16 points a game. So I think that's exactly where you want to be. So that shows the improvement. I think one of the big areas of improvement, they got a guy that was able to solidify that nickel spot, which is really important in Alex Grinch's defense. One, and I think two, they were able to finally kind of change the narrative in terms of their turnovers. That's something that Alex Grinch has preached since he's been here. So I think if you see an Oklahoma team that goes throughout the season, if they're giving up 17 points a game, that can continue from the last 6 games into the balance of the season. I think you have an Oklahoma team that is certainly in the playoffs and battling for a national championship. And I think, Mark, it's very interesting. I've over the last week or so, I've watched a lot of national stuff in terms of there's a lot of playoff prediction stuff, and more I'm seeing more people go out on that limb and at least pick Oklahoma to win a playoff game. Certainly not everyone's going so far as to predict them to win the national championship. So I think a lot of people are buying in to what Oklahoma is selling on the defensive side of the ball. And certainly we'll get into that with our fall camp notes. But I think Grinch is doing everything that he can. He's putting these kids in the right position to be successful. And I think it's not necessarily a make it or break it year, but I think in the 3rd year in Grinch's system here, he has his players. And there was lots of commentary this week about how much the talent level has improved on that side of the ball. And so I think it's kind of a put up or shut up year. He's not going to get fired or there's nothing like that, so to speak. But I think a lot of people point to this as the year where Oklahoma can challenge, and a lot of that rides on exactly how prolific they can be on the defensive side of the ball.